I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of the First Nation Market Housing Fund. And this fund was started 10 years ago, and it was used to be an option for First Nations on getting houses on the reserve. And what we do is we back mortgage loans for housing on reserve. Economic development has always been a very important part of anything I've done with First Nations since I became a political leader a number of years ago. And now I'm no longer a political leader, but I'm still moving forward with many economic development initiatives in Ontario and across the country. And I guess really what it is that First Nations need to be economically independent. They need to make their own money, not rely on government transfer payments. And with economic independence can come the true spirit of self-government. And that goes with the housing that I'm involved with. We have 240 First Nations that have signed up for the First Nation Market Housing Fund. And I'm involved with a number of other First Nations on different energy projects. The fund, as I said, was started 10 years ago. There was some rather optimistic thoughts on how far the fund could come in 10 years, and we found that it's a little bit more difficult once you're on the ground. We do have roughly $950 million of loans guaranteed. Now, they all haven't been taken up yet, but there are a number of First Nations across the country that are involved with the credit enhancement part of the fund, as well as the capacity development aspect of the fund. And so we're still pulling First Nations in. We have First Nation partners in every province in the country, including the 4 new First Nations that have just signed up here in BC. Well, it's really interesting. You can talk a lot about big numbers. You can talk a lot about we're gonna do this and do that. But you know, throwing money at a problem doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Having $17 billion, it's a nice number, but who's really in control of that? And what does it meant to do? Certainly aspects of education are really, really important. The more that our young people are staying in school, getting educated, then that's going to help. But you know, back home, I live on Wasauksing First Nation. I've got 12 grandkids, and you know, they're all. I wish them all to get university education and all that kind of thing. But in reality, maybe half of them will go to university, half of them will get post-secondary education. But this is a world where we need to get better educated, we need to get better jobs and get the young kids involved. We see across the country that there are too many kids who get in trouble with the law. That about 30% of people that fall in trouble with the law are First Nation. And yet we make up about 5% of the population. There's an issue there, there's a problem. People in jail don't make money and don't add to the economy of Canada. So we got to change that around. Is $17 billion going to help? I don't know. But if First Nations had a hand in how that was moved to appropriate resourcing of education or skill development, starting of new businesses, where we can develop economies, then maybe it will help. But it's just not going to be overnight. It's going to take a little while, and it's going to take a lot of thought and movement toward the area where we can actually say, yes, we are self-governed, we are economically independent, and we're adding to the economy, not only of the First Nation, but the economy of Canada. I think we need more money coming into our First Nations. I'm working on a project right now in Ontario where this project had several $100 million of senior debt financing. All of our money came from Asia or Europe, all of it. And we had an RFP out to different lending organizations in Canada, all of the big banks, they couldn't come to the same kind of terms that we got from offshore. That has to change, and while it's wonderful that we got good loans from overseas and from Asia and all over the place, I find it kind of tragic that there's not one Canadian lender involved with this wonderful project. Housing has always been one of the mainstays of the Canadian economy, and part of any economic forecast always includes housing starts, and it's a basic part. So, and that goes the same with our communities. And I was just talking to a person the other day about the required housing for First Nations across the country. And this person is pretty knowledgeable, and he says there's 135,000 units needed. And that's an enormous number, because our population is growing so quickly that we have family formations happening out there at an enormous pace. And so if you look at developing and building 130,000 houses, it's an enormous amount of money, it's a huge number of jobs, and you're putting families who need housing into the housing that they should have. Not all of it will be social housing, and a large part, I think, will be just straight mortgages, and the ability to get the mortgages on First Nations is so important, and that's what we do at the First Nation Market Housing Fund. You can get onto the website, the First Nation Market Housing Fund, and we have an office in Ottawa. We've got employees there that will answer the phone. We answer emails. We basically have said that as soon as we hear from them, we start getting back in touch. We will go out and meet with them in their community. We'll work with them on preparing an application to get into the credit enhancement part of the fund. We'll even look after their capacity development to build their housing policies, or to get finance people trained in their community.